morning, everybody. Now, what we've been talking about is the Judeo-Christian moral code as it relates to fostering human flourishing. And last week we looked at the very basic idea that when it comes to economics, when it comes to our material well-being, the very basic idea is that we are all, it is our duty to do what we can, no matter, to whom much is given, much also is required, but of nobody is nothing required, and that those who cannot, even making a diligent effort, cannot even take care of themselves, we have an obligation to take care of them. Okay, so charity is a duty, as well as doing what you can. And if that's 10 times more than you need to support yourself, that means you're going to be contributing to the welfare of the community at large, your family, extended family, community, Uncle Sam, whatever it happens to be. And so that's what we focused on there. We could go into more detail with that, but I want to move along. And now today, I want to talk about the sort of the fundamentals of justice and how that relates to how that relates to the Eighth Commandment. Okay, how that relates to the basic idea of truth and truth telling. And see what we can discern about that in terms of basically, there's a lot of directions we could go on this also, but again, the Judeo-Christian fundamental understanding of a society and how a society is structured and organized, okay? So let's return again to this idea of honor, shame, and justice, and let's begin with justice. What is justice? We don't really need to have a deep philosophical discussion now, as a question like that could evoke. But we all have this basic idea that justice is a thing out there. It is doing right. It is doing right under the circumstances. It is doing right fairly and impartially. And let's just put it that way. Justice is a thing out there that we are obligated to seek out, find, and do. Justice is a thing out there, whether you're an individual trying to do justice with the people around you, or whether you are a governmental leader or a Congress or a king. Justice is a thing under a Judeo-Christian understanding of things, is a thing that the king must seek out and is obligated to do. Okay? You do not rule simply by might and power. It is fundamental to the Judeo-Christian understanding of things that the king is under God, and the king is obligated as anyone else to the law of God. There is this thing called justice, and the king is required to seek it out and to do it. Wise kings seek it out and do it. Foolish kings do not. According to Proverbs chapter 16, it says, "It is an abomination to kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of a king, and he loves him who speaks what is right." In Proverbs 29:4 says, "By justice a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down." Okay? Very basic idea. The king does not rule because the kingdom is his plaything, and he is truly not above the law. He has an obligation to apply the law and follow the law. Once again, justice is a thing that we are to seek and find, and when we find, do. Okay? It is not malleable. It is not according to our whims. There may be many different ways to do justice in a particular situation, but it is not just up to me, the king, to do whatever I feel like doing. Christianity has always been an enemy of totalitarian systems of any kind. Okay? Part of the reason why they're against it is because we have one God, and the state is not our God, and totalitarian states tend to try to step in the position of God. That's what makes them totalitarian. God is totalitarian. He gets to rule over every aspect of your life. Fortunately, he is a benevolent dictator. But we do not ever owe to the state that kind of obeisance. Okay? So that's one reason. The other is because, just as we've been saying, the state is under God. The state is obligated and bound and constrained to do the things that God has commanded that we do. It is not all-powerful. And therefore, totalitarian states have tended to be an enemy of the church, and the church an enemy of totalitarian states, okay, throughout time. Okay, so justice is a thing out there that governments and kings have got to find and implement, and God defines what that is. All right, now let's just briefly talk about honor and shame again, reputation and truth, and understand how they're going to apply in a situation like this. For human beings to flourish, we live in societies. We need one another, okay? And societies can be organized well or they can be organized poorly. So if they are organized well, human beings flourish. If they are organized poorly, and I'm not talking about efficiencies, I'm talking about not righteously, okay? A well-ordered society. Honorable people, and by honorable I mean honorable in character and capable. These are the ones we want to elevate, okay? Who do we want in positions of responsibility? Honorable people who are capable and will do their job. A well-ordered society elevates people who are honorable and ought to be elevated, and doesn't elevate people who shouldn't be, and demotes people who were in positions and fell short. This is what should be. So now, how do you know who to honor and who not to honor? And so this is where the idea of reputation comes in. By reputation, I don't just mean the scuttlebutt. Oh, that's kind of what I mean. I mean what our neighbors know about us, okay? What they know about us by virtue of what they've seen, what others have said about you, the demonstrated capabilities that we have shown, the education or the certifications that we have, our experiences. This can be very formal in the sense of a resume and a curriculum vitae, that shows all that you've published and all the things that you've done. Or it can be very informal, the people who know you speak well of you, okay? Depending upon the position, all right, whether you're an employer looking to hire, or whether you are somebody who's voting and you're trying to decide whom we ought to put in a position of representative or senator or whatever. If you are in the government and deciding who's going to be on your cabinet or who to appoint to different posts, you're going to be doing this based on reputation. Formal reputation maybe, but nevertheless, you get a reputation. And a good reputation should match what we really have going on here, okay? So in other words, good people should have good reputations. And shameful people should not have good reputations. So this is where truth, all right, truth intersects with reputation. In a well-ordered society, truth intersects with reputation, and people who have good reputations have them for a good reason, okay? If you have a reputation for being capable in good, turns out you are capable in good. And if you do not get the job and won't get elected and won't get elevated and won't get honored and won't be held up by parents or others as an example, it's because you shouldn't be, and for good reason you shouldn't be, okay? So this is all like really simple stuff, but it's important to understand how all this works. Note, society for people to know whom to elevate and whom not, to whom to give the job, to whom to give the promotion, to whom to give the raise, whom to elect, whom to trust, and whom not. It is necessary that we have a good grasp on what people are like, and that requires truthfulness to abound among us. Do you understand what I mean by that? It doesn't do any good if you've got a good reputation, if your reputation has been sullied by lies, because I'm going to think you have a bad reputation, okay? So, or that is, I think you have a good reputation, but it's all a lie. If you've ever tried to hire people and tried to look through resumes, and everybody looks like they're various degrees of being able to walk on water, and it's kind of hard to understand, gee, which of these is real? Inflation, grade inflations in school is the same thing. All of a sudden everybody's got an A. If anybody gets less than an A, you might as well just hang it up and go home. That's grades in school are kind of a reputational thing. So truth is really, really important if society, if we are properly to honor or not honor, promote or demote the right people. Now consider the relationship of whom we honor and whom we don't, and the idea of justice. Okay? To promote and honor somebody who deserves it is just. It's just to that person that they should get the position because they've earned it. And the reputation and abilities say that. So it's just that that person get the job and this person not get the job because they were not demonstrably capable or good character, something like that. It is just. It is also good. It is good for all of society that competent, capable people be elevated to positions of responsibility, okay? Now everybody starts at the beginning, and one of the ways that you earn your way up is you start at the bottom and you demonstrate your capacities and up you go, okay? Hopefully. So when everything is well ordered and working right, the people who actually are in charge in our social structure are the right people, and if they're the right people, then the people rejoice, okay? If the people who are in charge are righteous people, the people rejoice. If the people who are in charge are wicked people, then the people groan, according to Proverbs. And so this is the idea. Again, the pursuit of justice is to have the right people in the right places. And one of the things about being a right person is you also are about the business of pursuing justice. And all this requires truthfulness. Okay? All this requires truthfulness. So that's the basic, kind of kindergarten or first or second grade explanation for how it's supposed to work. And even though it might be a kindergarten or first grade explanation, it's true. Some of the most true things you and I know, we did learn when we were in kindergarten. Okay? You can be as sophisticated as you like. These things don't go away. The 8th commandment says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This has traditionally been the anchoring commandment of the whole principle of justice. Sometimes the 5th commandment has been used that way too, you shall not murder. And you can see why that would be, because life and the valuing of life ultimately is the whole purpose of all of this. But let's just take a look at the 8th commandment. When we discuss the 8th commandment, typically we think about not lying. And certainly not lying is, encompassed within the 8th commandment. But it doesn't say you shall not lie. It says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now what's the difference? Well, bearing false witness implies some kind of being under oath, okay? You're being a false witness. You're not just lying. That's one thing. We have a more formal proceeding that doesn't mean it's not talking about if you're not under oath, you can lie if you like. It doesn't mean that. What it's saying is this is like the worst thing you can do. Under oath, lie. What kind of lie? Against your neighbor. Well, what I mean is, let's start here. Against your neighbor. So in other words, the point isn't that you just must always tell the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, you've lied. And if you've lied, you've broken this commandment. This commandment says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So what is the issue here? How does bearing false witness against your neighbor hurt your neighbor? It hurts their reputation. Okay? So if I say something terrible about Mike here, but Mike knows he's terrible that way. We all know Mike is terrible that way, and I say Mike is terrible that way. He laughs. We all laugh. It did not hurt his reputation, okay? In fact, he may find it to be a funny joke. In fact, we may all find it to be a funny joke because that was the whole point. I'm not hurting him. I'm not trying to hurt him. But what I said was a lie, I guess. It wasn't true. but it didn't hurt anybody, okay? Didn't hurt his reputation. But if I hurt his reputation, that's similar to hurting his body, okay? Or hurting his property. So we have in the 5th commandment, we don't hurt one another's bodies. The 6th commandment, we don't hurt one another's families. The 7th commandment, we don't hurt one another's financial ability. The 8th commandment, we don't hurt one another's reputation. It would be unjust to him if I lied before all of you and told you something about him that hurt his reputation, and he did not deserve that. That would be unjust. That would hurt him. Okay? Just like punching him in the nose would hurt him. That would be unjust unless he deserves it. And then he probably doesn't deserve it from me. So hurting somebody's reputation is to injure them, and it's unjust. It's also bad. I say to honor the right people is just and good. It's good for all of us. To dishonor the wrong people is unjust and bad for all of us. Okay? So if we start lying to one another and about one another in such ways that our reputations begin to be damaged, that makes it difficult for society to know who it is that we're supposed to elevate and who not. In other words, if you don't deserve it but you get a bad reputation, you get a bad reputation because some important people start lying about you, that can destroy you. You didn't deserve it. And that's not good. It's unjust. It's also bad for society because somebody who could have contributed won't be able to because we've all just judged that person to be disreputable. And because they're disreputable, even though they were perfectly capable and actually quite reputable, we do not elevate them to a position of responsibility. We drum them out of town. Okay, is what we do instead. So this is bad for everybody. Okay. So this commandment is concerned with our reputations and truthfulness with respect to our reputation. The way I hurt your body is I throw something at you, I hit you, I trip you, I poison your food, something like that. The way I hurt your reputation is I tell lies about you. Okay, that's what I do. So I'm not going to go off on a discursus and what the commandments say about other kinds of lies. I'm saying here, though, what we're concerned with is lying in such a way that we unjustly hurt our neighbor. Okay? Because that's unjust, and it's also bad for society. What if everybody did that? Okay. Now, so false witness against your neighbor, and the basic idea here is we need to elevate the people who should be elevated. We'll all be better off if we do that. And we need to demote and keep out of positions of responsibility people whose character or abilities simply tell us that they shouldn't be there. We'll all be better off for that, and that's just for those people as well. Okay, well, I remember I talked about, let's look at this here. Proverbs is filled with little truths about kings. And as I mentioned before, kings in the ancient Near East were real despots. But the Israelite king was not. The Israelite king was under the law and was obligated to keep the commandments of God and to do justice. Okay? And so there are many things in Proverbs that extol the king for being wise and righteous and doing wise and righteous things and surrounding himself with wise and righteous people. Partiality in judging is not good. Whoever says to the wicked, "You are in the right," will be cursed by peoples, abhorred by nations. But those who rebuke the wicked and have delight, a good blessing will come upon them. Whoever gives an honest answer kisses the lips. Okay, so we want truthfulness. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for a vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Okay. So the king has an obligation before God to do what's right and just. He surrounds himself with people to advise him, and they are to be devoted to truth and justice and righteousness as well. And if the king is surrounded by liars and cheaters, then even if the king himself is righteous, he's going to have trouble with running a righteous kingdom. So now, consider then why, both in the law of Moses and in Proverbs, there is such a lot of attention paid to bribery and corruption and favoritism and things like that. These are the very definitions, if you think about it, these are the very definitions of the lack of truthfulness destroying social cohesion. What's the difference between corruption and public corruption? Well, I mean, all of us can be corrupt here or there or do things that aren't right. Is it different when we engage in public corruption? Yes, it is. You have been given a trust and you are now abusing the entire body politic for your own self, okay? So bribery is a kind of public corruption. Favoritism, I mean, the law of Moses is very clear to judges that you are not to favor the poor and you are not to favor the rich. You are to judge justly, okay? Well, if you're afraid that judging justly is not going to go well for you, what might you do if you have no concern for the truth? You might offer the judge a bribe. And when the judge gets a bribe, what does he do? Well, then he elevates somebody he shouldn't have elevated, and he debases somebody who shouldn't have been debased. I mean, I'm using very simple terms here, but when you boil it down, that's what's happening. When an innocent person is convicted, we are shaming somebody who should not have been shamed. When a guilty person is let off, we are essentially honoring or not shaming somebody who ought to have been shamed. And when that happens because the judge is on the take, then we have public corruption. So when you have these sorts of things that the Scriptures talks about, the corruption that can infiltrate our society, what ends up is that wicked people who are willing to play that game rise. And the nice guys finish last. Okay? That's unjust. You know what else it is? Bad. Bad for all of us. Societies that operate like that, where the wicked rise to the top because they're willing to play the game and play the hardball and do what needs to be done, we all suffer when that happens.
It's been said that everybody starts with good intentions, but then they always have to play the game to make it in the world, because nice guys don't make it in the game.
Well, and so let's ask that question. It's often the case that you have a society, well, okay, there are many, probably the majority, I don't know if it's probably if you took all countries, probably the majority of the countries, you don't get anywhere dealing with the local DMV without paying a bribe. I mean, that's just kind of standard. It's so standard that it's almost considered legal. It's not, but everybody knows to do it. The cop pulls you over, and to give him, $50, and the whole thing goes away. And that goes into his pocket, okay? Now, when you're in a society like that, it's very difficult to be the one guy who won't do that. You've all seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? Okay, well, you might say that this is a very naive kind of way of looking at it, and of course it's naive. It's also idealistic. But idealistic tells us what it is that we want, what should be. And so Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and he's the one honest politician. And he finds that he's not very welcome, and he can't get anything done because he's the one honest politician. Of course, he's the hero of the movie, but the truth is he sticks out like a sore thumb. And that's an example of what you're talking about. What makes Mr. Smith special is he doesn't cave. He continues to do the right thing, even though he is being given a lot of pressure to do the wrong thing, okay? What was The Untouchables with Kevin Costner, right? And Elliot Ness. Sean Connery, yeah. There's another one. In other words, he's untouchable. He can't be bribed by the mobsters, okay? And so then we end up. All right. So these are American ideals, and they're very important because they go back to this. The king is supposed to be ruling in righteousness, and that means he needs to be surrounded by, and the people who rise above to in order to serve the king have got to be the kinds of people who also wish to rule in righteousness. But there is this constant pressure to self-deal, which is why public corruption works so well. You offer a judge a bribe, and the judge takes the bribe because he gets rich taking the bribe, and he likes getting rich. Okay? That's how that works. So that means there's pressure. That's why drug cartels and things like that have so much success. They got so much money. It is hard to be, it's just hard to say no. When you have a society that's driven that way, the wicked rise to the top. The ones that are willing to fold rise to the top. Now here's just an obvious statement about human beings. If you are willing to be faithless in little, then you are much more likely to be faithless in much. Okay? So if you take the little bribe and move your way up, then you'll take the larger bribe and move your way up more. And then by the time you get to the top, now, how many of us here just assume, I don't know if it's true or not, but we just assume that by the time you get to the high levels of the federal government, you are so corrupt that if anybody actually looked at you, they'd all be in jail. Now, I don't know whether that may be a little too cynical, but there's a reason why it's easy to think that way. Because every time you lift up the hood on one of these lives, you realize, whoa, I see a lot of things in there that I would not have expected to see in my next door neighbor. And it seems to be, well, how the game is played. Okay? But that's not how it's supposed to be played. Note, I put there the exaltation of the fool. Proverbs many times talks about what a woeful thing, what a baleful thing it is when a fool rises to high places, okay? Because that is an indication of corruption. That's an indication of stupidity, not in the fool, but in the people who elevated the fool, and we all suffer for that. We all suffer. It's unjust, and we all suffer, okay? Any thoughts on this so far? Okay, now, we don't have a king. We don't want a king. But we do have a government, and we do have to rule. And as far as the Judeo-Christian worldview goes, the rules have not changed. Who is exercising those rules and the manner in which they get put in their position, that has changed. We don't have a king, okay? However, we still have the obligation to do justice and act righteously. So that means that individual citizens, when they're going to vote, in terms of what they support or what they don't support, still have the obligation, recognize that they are still under the law of God, that we cannot say, any more than the king, now listen to this, any more than the king could not say, my will is the law. The king had to acknowledge, God's law is the law, and whatever it is that I do has got to be within the constraints of God's law. It's the same if you take the king out and say, here we're going to put all the public in that place. We still have the obligation to rule ourselves within the constraints of God's law. We cannot say anymore that the people are sovereign and can do what they want. The people are not sovereign in the sense that they can do what they want. Okay? The people get to exercise the prerogatives of the king by means of an election and a representative, and that representative also is bound by the law of God. We used to call this natural law. And it was just assumed that the king and the population were governed according to what the basic principles of the Judeo-Christian worldview were. Okay? The Founding Fathers made it very clear that this Constitution is not designed for any other than a moral people. And what they meant by that is a people who understood what government entails, what you can and cannot do. Remember that a democratic government that is consisting of all the people can be just as tyrannical and totalitarian as any emperor or despot. And what keeps a proper government, whether it's a democratically elected one or a single king from being just a totalitarian state is they are under God, one way or the other, okay? So we Christians cannot just say, well, we can vote for whatever we want because the Constitution forbids the, mixing church and state or something like that. We can't do that. We still have to vote our conscience, and your conscience is bound by the Word of God. So there are things that we can say, well, the Constitution will allow us to do that, but God will not permit me to do that. So, all right. We are exercising self-rule, but the basic rules have not changed, okay? The basic rules that constrain government are the same for us now as they were at any other time. We are now the king, in essence, and so we need to be advised. And the political process in our country, the whole idea was, the political process was to be an engagement of political argumentation and persuasion, okay? There is this thing called truth, and we're supposed to be finding it. Now, people don't always agree on what the truth is, but people should agree that there is a truth. So if you and I differ as to the truth, we ought to admit that either I'm wrong, you're wrong, or we're both wrong. Okay? But we should never say, well, we're both right because you have your truth and I have mine. That doesn't work. We might both go back to the drawing board to go searching for the truth. Or I might persuade you that I was right and you were wrong. Not because I'm just such a nice guy that you must be right. It's because I persuaded you that there's this thing out there and it's truth and I didn't make it up. But I found it and I persuaded you that I found the right truth. And you became persuaded and embraced the same truth. Okay? This is how political discussion and discourse is supposed to be going according to a search for truth and persuasion, okay? Because there's this thing out there called truth, and there's this thing out there called justice. And if you and I are going to rule ourselves, or we're going to elect somebody else to rule on our behalf, we are bound by the same obligations. And so political discourse in the Judeo-Christian, in sort of Western mindset, that was what it was, okay? We are searching for truth, and we are trying to persuade one another, okay? Thoughts on that? This requires a free and open sharing of ideas. So this is the basis for the First Amendment, the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, is to make sure that if we're going to be ruling ourselves, we've got to be able to speak freely to persuade. Note that the idea of what policies or what directions we want to go is very closely aligned to the people who are advocating them, and they have a reputation of their own. Okay? So truthfulness applies not only to my reputation and your reputation, but it also applies to different policies or things that we might be interested in pursuing. Truthfulness is vital here. If the king is going to make good decisions, he's got to have not only good advice, but truthful advice. And you and I, if we're going to make good decisions on our self-rule, have got to have truthful information and correct information. And then when we elect people to rule for us, they've got to have the same information, and we have got to have information about what they're doing. Do we see how basic this is? Now, I'm going to make some observations that probably you'll all say yes. I'm trying not to be partisan, so I'm just going to say some things that probably all of us say, yeah, that's kind of the status of things these days, okay? And I want you to note just how far away we have moved. Now, we don't need to be naive and think that it was ever quite like it was supposed to be. There's always been the kinds of things that we're about to talk about here, but they do seem to have gotten out of hand. So right now, my observation would be, probably you'll agree, that political discourse has ceased to be about truth and persuasion. For one thing, there's not enough information even given, and we have no idea whether the information we're getting is true or not. There's just too much. And this guy says yes, and that guy says no to exactly the same thing. I have no idea. He says you're lying, you say he's lying. This half says that half's lying, that half says this half's lying, and I'm in the middle. I have no way of knowing. I have no way of finding out. I don't know where I would go to find out. And nobody is taking the time to sit down with me and say, okay, well, it's going to take a little while here, but this is why this side is either right, or at least better, or something. Almost all of our information that we're getting that we would call political discourse is coming in little 5-second sound bites. It's coming in little snippets. And the little snippets are almost comically simplified. And then, so you get the impression, no matter which side you're on, you get the impression that the other side is either hopelessly evil or hopelessly stupid, because this is so obvious, okay? But the other side, turns out, feels the same thing about you. What is missing?
Truth.
We don't have, maybe it's out there. I have to believe it's out there. There's an awful lot of words out there. Some of them got to be true. But supposing you were a king, and you assemble, or a queen, okay, and you assemble your council, okay? And it turns out your council of 25 people is more interested in winning than in being right. And so we find out that this half is really fighting hard to get you to go this way. That half is fighting hard to get you to go the other way. But both of them, or neither one of them, are really trying to persuade me that they're right. They're trying to scare me or bamboozle me or talk about how horrible the other guy is or whatever. And I'm the king. And I have to make a decision. And when we're done with the discourse, I realize that nobody is giving me any reason to go this way or that way. What do? Fire them all. You have to, right? Because under God, your job is to do the right and just thing, and that requires a level of truthfulness, and I'm not getting it because these people are playing a game, okay? They're playing a game because each side want to win. But what I want is what? I got to have the information, and I got to have good advice. And that means you've got to set aside whether, if the other guy had a better idea than you, but he's right, support him. Yeah.
It's kind of like when, we could go all the way back to when Jesus was doing his ministry, and he was trying to let everybody know his truth, and people were not wanting to hear him, but he was speaking truth.
Sure. Well,
it's the same thing. People were thinking he was Looney Tunes, like, how dare you speak blasphemy? And it's the same thing, like.
Well, there's nothing new under the sun.
No, there's nothing new under the sun.
But we can say this. I do think this, that the situation has gotten out of hand for us, okay? Because while I might say there's nothing new under the sun, I'm not going to say it's never been better, it's never been worse, it's always been exactly the same. I do believe that it is possible to do better than what we're doing. And what I'm wanting to do is identify a narrow sliver, but an important sliver, of what has gone desperately wrong in our country. And I'm not assigning any blame to it, because frankly, you're just going to full up and cry. That's what you're going to do. And so that's kind of what we have here. All right, so what's my evidence? All right, well, do we agree that propaganda, as it's come to be known, is when messages are sent out, it doesn't have to be from the government, but when messages are crafted, not for the truthfulness, but for their effect. Now think about that. What we should be doing is speaking the truth in order to persuade, not using words to cause an effect. The truth is the effect we want to cause. We want to assume that another person would be persuaded by the truth, so we want to be persuasive in the use of the truth and trust the other person. But if that doesn't work, then what do? Well, we could hit them on the head, but let's not do that. Let's try another way. Let's try to fashion our message so that it looks true, even though it's not. Okay?
I think that there are more gradations in there, that there are different dimensions of the truth. So I will take a specific example where the word newcomer replaced the word illegal alien.
Well, sure.
And they are newcomers. And in fact, many of them are here for opportunity. So the truth is somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, well, okay. So let's take a look at some of these others and note that propaganda isn't necessarily false. If it was always false, it'd be easy. Okay, it's not always false. It's just packaged in a way that you can't tell what's true and what's not. And the person, the key thing here is that the message is being packaged for its effect, not for its truthfulness. Okay? Now, we all know what this is. When you are explaining to somebody to defend yourself, what will you do? You will bring out all the facts that are in your favor, and you will leave out the facts that are not in your favor to make you look better. Okay? Now, is that lying? Yes. Is it the same thing as baldly changing all the facts? No. It's one of those gradations you're talking about. Spin, this kind of thing. I mean, we're going to put it a particular way so that it sounds good for me. Demagoguery means that I am actually just trying to manipulate crowds of people. For what purpose? I want their vote. I want their vote. Okay? If the truth will not get me elected, but a lie will, and I'm a demagogue, what will I do? I will lie. Okay? Because demagoguery is looking to win, however it has to do it. Okay? So I am not going to rat on myself to talk about some of my own positions and maybe their weaknesses. I'm only going to tell you what I want you to hear because I want your vote. Concealment just means I just don't tell you what, if you knew this, might change your mind. But I don't want you to change your mind. So I just won't tell you that. Okay? Could have told you that. I knew it was material, but I choose not to. There's all kinds of ways in which we can, okay, I can manipulate things. Look what has happened with social media that's kind of scary, where what you see and when you see it and who you see it from is all being manipulated by algorithms or groups of people who are doing things so that you can't tell anymore where this is coming from, whether it's reliable, and whether I can use it. And so I had a very frustrating conversation with somebody who was really arguing for, it was a simple example, but for climate change, and they were saying climate change is going to ruin the world. And I said, well, there's all these people who say it's not going to ruin the world. Well, they're wrong. I said, okay. And I was fine with that, but what I asked is, how do I know? Where do I go? And I meant that. I wasn't challenging them. I just, where do I go? You say this, they say that. I don't know. I'm not going to be around 50 years from now when the Empire State Building is underwater. I'm not going to be there then. Where do I go for an unbiased, or at least a trying to be unbiased? And I don't know.
Third party.
Well, but there, yeah. I mean, which third party? And it turns out that third parties are not necessarily disinterested.
I know.
Well, no, I know that this the whole frustrating thing here is that I would like to have, even if they're not always right, if they're just trying to, but we don't have much of that. So, information, data. All right. Do I need to bring up COVID? I mean, how, in that instance, I mean, every other day there was another thing. First you do this, then you do that.
I am the science.
And yeah, and it's like the one, and this was really unfortunate because two institutions really took a hit. One is just science generally, because we like to think of science as, again, not necessarily right, but attempting to be unbiased, okay, impartial. And then the medical field was another, which we're said, okay, well, they're not always right, but we just assumed that they are going to put politics and a desire for a particular outcome behind and just give us the fact. But that was not what was done, and it became really apparent as we went along. And then it turned out that some of the things that we were told were absolutely positively right weren't absolutely positively right. Well, okay, so we're right back where we were. Where do I go for a straight and honest answer? And there may not be anywhere where I can go for a straight and honest answer. Elections have become about winning. And you say, well, no duh, of course they are. But let's think about that. What do we really need? We are the sovereign kings, okay? What do we need in order to vote wisely, in order to support wise things, in order to put the right people in position? We need truth somewhere. Not perfect truth, we can't get that, but we at least need to try. So that, what should we want? Well, okay, the old thing, would you rather be honest, do the right thing, and lose, or shade the truth, do what needs to be done in order to win? Now,
But then you can tell
but so this is the thing, and this is the really hideous part. A person can easily convince themselves that I have to win or I can't help. So if I can't win and do what's right, and I want to do what's right, then what I'm going to do is not do what's right in order to get elected, and then
I'll be good.
I will do what's right. Okay? Is that how it works? If it does work it that way sometimes, we're just lucky. Because typically, you know, if you're faithless in little, you will be faithless in much. So, we can list the various issues that are coming up for this next election. But what we're going to find is that we have almost no idea, they're just not being discussed, why this way rather than that way. What we're finding out is this is what the polls say, this is what the polls say, this is what the polls say. They're ahead here, they're ahead here, they're ahead here, they're behind here. They need to change their message this way. In other words, I'm going to call it game, but I'm not meaning necessarily that, but the science of getting somebody elected. But the science of getting somebody elected, the craft of getting them elected, all right, does not necessarily have anything to do with the truth. But the truth should be what it is that we absolutely need in order to know who to elect, and then once they're elected, what we want them to do. Now, so my point here is, and to point out that in our society there's something very, very fundamental that has gone really wrong. Now, it's never been perfect, but I mean, it's gotten to the point now where I honestly don't know. On 3/4 of these issues, I have no idea. And I don't even know where to go to find out. And I don't have anybody that I can absolutely trust. And it doesn't mean that I think everybody's a liar. It's just that everybody's in the same position I'm in. They don't know either. They think it's this. And so I appreciate them telling me they think it's that. But I don't have the information or the wherewithal. And our political system has become so polarized that it is no longer really geared toward presenting voters with truth, or not even just voters. Elected representatives don't get the information either, and they're having to vote with their party, or they're having to vote in order to stay in office or something like that, rather than, we need to do what's right because bad things are going to happen if we don't, and it may not be good for my re-election, but that is just not heard of. It's occasionally spoken of, but we don't really see it. That's a problem. And as I said, for human beings to flourish, we live in societies. And societies are either rightly ordered according to just principles that require truth-telling, or they're not. So we don't really have to say that everybody in our culture is a liar. We can just say that we don't know where to go to get the truth. So even if everybody is trying to be as sincere as they can, the system is failing us. We're supposed to be ruling, and the advice we're getting from our counselors is not useful, okay? I got to quit, but does anybody have an observation? Yes?
Sort of along the lines of what we're talking about, kind of a humorous thing, that I got a t-shirt I don't know why my daughter gave it to me, but it said, "I'm an engineer. I don't argue, I just explain why I'm right."
Well, and it's good if you can explain why you're right. And you got the numbers, okay? Nobody's got the numbers anymore. Yes, sir.
I think one of the things when you say follow, try to find the truth, the secret to that is follow the money trail. You're going to come to the truth every time you do. And you take almost any of your political situations that are promulgated out there. Look at the money trail. Why somebody's doing something. Why this politician is going to vote this way. Like I said, just follow the money. Because every last one of them has something to do with money.
And I'm not going to disagree with you, but understand what he just said. I mean, that is practically the definition of public corruption. And I don't mean to say that individuals are personally evil and corrupt. What I'm saying is the system is being driven by things other than the truth. It's being driven by other interests. That's not new. But we all do need to recognize that, and then that is not just the way it ought to be. Okay? Our worldview says that there is this thing out there called justice, and there's this thing out there called truth. And the job of the king, and in that case that's all of us, is to seek out the truth and do it when we find it, and try to persuade and argue with those around us why what we found is the truth, and be open-minded that they may be right, and turns out he's got the numbers and I need to go with him, rather than everything is firing for effect. You understand what I mean by firing for effect? You're not trying to hit something, you're just trying to scare them to go that way, okay? That's all. We're not trying to win, we're just trying to influence by any means possible. But truth and politics, I mean, those should go together. And now what we have is a game on this side and truth that is left out there somewhere, I don't know where. Well, let's pray. Lord Jesus, help us. Help us, you've given us wisdom, Lord, and help us at least within your church to embrace and hold fast the truth that you've given to us, and to act accordingly. And Lord, to stand for the things which you have given to us, but especially to stand for this. Oh Lord, that we are all called, whether we are the king or whether we are the voting public or the president or whoever it is, to seek out and to do justice and do what's right and to seek the truth. We ask that you would help us, O Lord, as a nation. Amen.